research. It's taken me at least a year, maybe two. I've got historic maps up on the walls. My notebooks are full of facts, dates, and useful local details. I am confidently moving my hero through a series of exciting scenes. Then, just when I've got a good rhythm going, I hit a wall. How much can my hero actually see in this new night scene I'm about to write? It's 1815. Did Paris have streetlights in 1815? What kind of streetlights? Were they lit by gas or oil? Did the lighting flicker? How much did it flicker? So I look up Paris street lighting on the internet and down I tumble, just like Alice, right down the rabbit hole, and soon I am heading down tunnels and opening doors to find out more about arc lamps or Yablochkov candles and Arnand burners, oil lights with silvered reflectors that were suspended by ropes over the Paris streets. And then I want to know who Yablochkov was and what brought him to Paris from Moscow in the 1870s. And then I'm in Moscow in 1812 and I'm thinking about War and Peace and wondering what date it was written, and for an unsettling moment, I just can't remember where all this started. These days, when I'm deep in the first draft of a novel, I confess to the audience, I have to use an internet blocker. You set it for a particular amount of time, I explain, and once it's set, you can't get into the internet no matter how hard you try. I can see people reaching for their pens to write down the name of the app. What about your phone, someone asks. Can't you go in that way? Everyone laughs. You have to block every device, I say, every single one. When you're writing, you have to commit to the writing, stay above ground, particularly when it gets difficult. The phrase, down the rabbit hole, comes, of course, from Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, published in 1865. Alice followed the white rabbit down the hole, fell a long way, got lost, wandered around, opened doors, got bigger and then smaller, swam in a pool of her own tears, met a menagerie of strange creatures, and finally emerged, awestruck, back into the upper world. Alice's rabbit hole journey was an adventure, a strange one, yes, a surreal one, certainly, but it wasn't a nightmare. These days, we invariably use the phrase, down the rabbit hole, to describe a negative experience in the warrens of the internet where people get lost, then become overwhelmed, ensnare themselves in conspiracy theories, and can't get back out. But I don't believe rabbit holes are bad in themselves. If we avoid them altogether, we lose the chance to experience their joy and excitement. And this isn't an experience that arrived with the digital world. I remember the pleasures of falling down rabbit holes in my university library in the 1980s. The portal for us then was books, not the internet. My search might start out with something in a novel we were studying. Why was Thomas Hardy so obsessed with bloodlines in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, for instance? And sooner or later I'd be scuttling up and down the shelves, looking for books about 19th century theories of blood, or heredity, or free will. One thing just led to another. I might get lost for days before I realized I had to find my path back to the surface and write that essay. But being down the rabbit hole was always a grand adventure for me. It still is. I came to appreciate that I couldn't find the path that really interested me without going down the rabbit hole first, even if it took up time. But I also knew that at some point I would have to come back and stay back. Charles Darwin fell down a vast rabbit hole in 1846 in pursuit of a barnacle. At the time he was 35, living a quiet life in Kent with a growing family. He'd already honed his groundbreaking theory of natural selection into an essay. All he had to do now was turn that essay, locked away in his drawer, into the book that would eventually be called On the Origin of Species. All he had to do was sit down and actually write it. But, rearranging his study, he came across a small glass jar of wine spirits containing a very rare specimen of barnacle. He had teased it out from inside a tiny hole in a conch shell that he'd found on the shores of southern Chile back in 1835. Under his microscope on the Beagle, it had looked just like a barnacle. But barnacles had shells, and this one didn't. This one had burrowed a hole in the conch shell instead. As a joke, he'd labelled the creature Mr. Arthrobalanus. Darwin decided he'd try to figure out the riddle of this creature, how it had come to be, how it fitted into the barnacle group as a whole. He told himself it would be a useful exercise in taxonomy. It would only take him a month. Instead, he tumbled into an 8-year-long obsession, because to understand Mr. Arthrobalanus, Darwin had to study every barnacle variant he could find, living and fossil. And to do that, he had to call in favours from naturalists all over the world. And with each new set of specimens that the postman brought in his sack, Darwin had to dissect and destroy barnacle body part after barnacle body part. And what he found inside the world of the barnacle was, he had to admit, really strange. Darwin knew the barnacle basics when he began, that they start out as free-swimming larvae, and that as they mature they stick to the rocks with their heads, secrete their houses around them, and fish for food with their feet through a tiny hatch. But as he explored further, things got weirder and weirder. Barnacles, he discovered, have the largest penises proportionate to size in the animal kingdom, which they probe about until they find a neighbouring hatch that will open. The human equivalent would be like being able to inseminate a neighbour living several doors down through an open window. Darwin's letters to other naturalists during these years are full of comedy and wonder at the endless and bizarre adaptations of the natural world. Was this just an 8-year-long destruction? Was it all a waste of time? Would Darwin look back and cringe? Of course not. The publication of his 2-volume monograph on barnacles buttressed his reputation in the world of zoology, proved he was a man of detail and tenacity, not just a man of wild fingers. By the time he had finished with Mr. Arthrobalanus, he'd established a huge international network of contacts and correspondence. He'd also tested his species theory and was now ready to tackle his species book. Rabbit holes aren't new, I remind myself, because the process of discovery, just like evolution itself, doesn't travel in straight lines. Disappearing down that rabbit hole might be time-consuming, disorientating, and deeply distracting, but it might just be a necessary part of discovery. Because discovery is a story of endless meanderings and false starts, of movements backwards as well as forwards, of sudden jumps and accelerations. And if rabbit holes are neither new nor avoidable, if they are part of how we learn to navigate this strange and endlessly fascinating world around us, its history and its meanings, then we might as well embrace the journey, learn how to sift fact from fiction, truth from nonsense, but always be sure to come back up into the light.
The point of view was written and presented by Rebecca Stott. The producer was Sheila Cook. Now, tweet of the day. David Rothenberg explains that mockingbirds do not mock, but they can copy over 1,000 bird songs.
Brooklyn, Connecticut. This is the time when mockingbirds started being heard. This was talked about. They got warmer and they moved further north. It's just a southern bird. So the mockingbird does not imitate, does not mock. It composes out of the sounds of the birds in its midst. So mockingbird will very carefully connect these different sounds. You notice like the ovenbird goes, teacher, 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 teacher. Yellowthroats or the Carolina wren both go teacher, 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 witchy, 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 witchy. But add the sound of music in the middle of this, playing with the later song and end with some total contrast, like a big tip. Each phrase in the mockingbird has this kind of complexity. No one has ever talked about that. No one's studied it. And I know from talking to biologists, they're discouraged from working with something so complex and otherwise so difficult to make it. They're afraid nothing can happen. The Mockingbird is the number one list. Daza, their leader. Anasawa tells us why. Mother Russia. Widows turning briefly to politics.
The response should show that it is the red line, but not the green light. We have crossed this red line, but without any response that consequences, it will be green light for all Europeans.
There's a new mission to the moon right now. 12 men have walked on it, 4 are still alive, 1 speaks to the age.
When we got to the moon and we came around from the backside and had blurred lines for the first time, my first thought, well, we're a long way from home. I hope this thing holds together and gets me back.
I feel the same. Words out. Jules Holland pays tribute to the king of love songs, Steve Wright, and what makes the perfect ballad.
I think of the greatest love song, getting the words so they're really short, but at the same time go like an arrow to the person's heart.
Speaking of which, Bee Glover's back on Radio 4, along with the Northern Echo's Chris Lloyd and Lauren McMahon for you BBC Now. First, the actual headlines with Hello Smith. Hello.
Hello, Paddy. The White House has blamed Russia's capture of a frontline town in eastern Ukraine on the failure of the US Congress to approve a package of military aid for Kyiv. President Biden spoke to the Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky after the announcement that Ukraine's army had pulled out of the town of Avdiivka. Mr. Biden told him he was confident that Congress would approve the war aid. Our correspondent Will Vernon reports from Washington.
In a phone call with President Zelensky, Joe Biden emphasized the need for the US Congress to urgently pass legislation to grant more military aid to Ukraine. It was congressional inaction, said the White House statement, that led to the Ukrainian army's withdrawal from Avdiivka due to a shortage of supplies and ammunition. In recent months, Republican lawmakers have repeatedly failed to approve $60 billion of desperately needed funds for Kyiv. Mr. Zelensky expressed gratitude for Mr. Biden's backing, adding, "I believe the US Congress will make a wise decision."
The government says people from Ukraine who've sought sanctuary in the UK will be able to apply for 18-month visa extensions. Nearly 300,000 Ukrainians have been granted 3-year visas since Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. An independent rights monitoring group in Russia says more than 400 people have now been detained at events across the country held to mark the death in prison of the opposition leader Alexei Navalny. His supporters have accused the Russian authorities of trying to cover their tracks by refusing to release his body to his family. 2 government ministers have written to police chiefs in England and Wales, encouraging them to make robust use of their powers to prevent protesters from harassing MPs in their homes. Last week, several dozen pro-Palestinian demonstrators staged a protest outside the home of the Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood. Our political correspondent Harry Farley reports.
In their joint letter to Chief Constables, the Security Minister Tom Tugendhat and the Policing Minister Chris Philp said some protesters, by targeting MPs in their homes, were having a chilling effect on politics. These people, Mr Tugendhat told the Sunday Telegraph, think of themselves as progressive and on the side of right. They are not. He added they are shouting down debate and silencing democracy. Last Monday, more than 60 people calling for a ceasefire in Gaza spent 3 hours outside the Dorset home of Tobias Ellwood. The ministers said police had their full support to make robust use of powers to move protesters away from someone's home if they were harassing people or causing distress.
Thailand's former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra has been released on parole from a hospital where he'd been serving a jail sentence for corruption and abuse of power. He was detained last August when he returned to Thailand after 15 years of self-imposed exile. Our correspondent Jonathan Head reports from Bangkok. Thaksin Shinawatra's decision to fly back to Thailand last year was widely believed to be down to a political deal to offer him leniency. Early this morning, he was driven out of a police hospital and allowed to return home, having served just 6 months of a prison sentence which had already been reduced from 8 years to 1. The 74-year-old former Prime Minister was seen leaving wearing a neck brace with one arm in a sling. Some had questioned whether his health justified his transfer to a hospital right after his arrival in Bangkok. Mr. Thaksin still has a lot of influence in his party, but much less than he once had on his country. He will also be constrained now by the conditions of his parole and by a charge under Thailand's punitive lèse-majesté law, which the police filed against him 2 weeks ago. The Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron is travelling to the Falkland Islands this week, the first visit by a UK cabinet minister since 2016. He's expected to reiterate the government's long-standing position that the sovereignty of the disputed territory in the South Atlantic must remain in the gift of its residents. Our correspondent Sean Dilley reports.
Lord Cameron's visit is, on paper, just part of a programme of trips he's making to the Americas. But it's a visit set against a backdrop of continued calls by Argentina for the self-governed British overseas territory to be handed to Buenos Aires. Lord Cameron is expected to echo words he used when he was Prime Minister in 2013, when the islanders voted overwhelmingly in a referendum to retain its status. He'll say that as long as residents want to remain part of the British family, the issue of sovereignty will not be up for discussion.
And England's cricketers have been set an improbable target to win the third test against India in Rajkot. The hosts declared their second innings on 430 for 4, meaning England must score 557 to secure victory. The 5-match series is currently level at 1-1. At tea, the tourists have reached 18 for 2.
Yes, an improbable target. I feel it's a timeless headline.
Indeed.
Hello, we're live on Radio 4. Delighted that you are risking listening. Before we leave you at 10, we'll talk about should you brush your teeth before or after breakfast, and we're going to invite you to walk on the moon. But Widowmaker Vladimir Putin now faces a growing band of women turning Greek into politics, as his critics at home and abroad die in air crashes, poisonings and falling from windows. We turn the spotlight on those left behind. Here's Marina Litvinenko, whose husband Alexander defected to the UK and was killed here by polonium poisoning in 2006. She now campaigns against President Putin. I met her on the BBC's newscast. It's interesting when you look at these women. You're one of several. There's Masha Ayukina, a member of Pussy Riot, the anti-Putin. There's you. There's Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who is the wife of Sergei Tikhanovsky, who ran against the Belarusian president. Do you think that the women of these men who are imprisoned and murdered will rise up and become a strong international force?
I will add Evgenia Karamurza, who is a very, very strong opponent of this regime. I would call Zhana Nemtsova as a daughter of Boris Nemtsov. Yes, it's very strong voices of this woman who might bring some more attention all around the world.
Supporters of Alexei Navalny, who died suddenly in a Siberian prison, say the regime is now hiding his body. His widow, Yulia, spoke at the Munich Security Conference, and her words obviously are spoken by a translator here.
I was thinking for a long time, what should I do? Should I go here, or should I fly straight to see my kids? But then I thought, what would Alexei do if he was here? And I'm sure that he would have chosen to be here, to come to this stage.
Sarah Rainsford is the BBC's Eastern Europe correspondent, who was herself banned from Russia in 2021. She's live on BH. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, good morning.
It's a growing band of critics who die.
It is, yeah. Of course, we don't know the actual cause of death yet of Alexei Navalny, but there are huge suspicions, of course, amongst all of his supporters, his allies, his political team, and his family, and they're obviously being fueled by the fact that they're not getting access to his body, and all they have at the moment is one piece of paper that says he went out for a walk in his prison in the Arctic Circle and he dropped dead, and that medics were just unable to resuscitate him. So of course his political team and his mother and his wife, they want to get access to his body, and they still haven't got that.
Mother, wife. Listeners will worry we're making a specious connection, but actually I wonder if can we just delve into this a bit. What is the impact of the women on the Russian leader? Like a lot of strong men, it's not clear what his relationship with women is, and if these widows around the world are taking to the stage, is that a problem for him?
Oh gosh, it's a difficult question. I would say that Vladimir Putin is a classic sexist. He underestimates women all the time. That was true of Alexander Lukashenko, his big ally in Belarus, who thought that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya was such a nobody that he could let her onto the ballot back in 2020 to stand against him. And of course then there were giant protests which actually almost led to Lukashenko being toppled in 2020.
She's our guest in a minute.
Yeah, so underestimating women is kind of a regional thing, and Vladimir Putin definitely does it. When he gets to be interviewed, he often likes to be interviewed by women because he doesn't reckon they can challenge him. So there's that. There's also the sense that Russia has a slightly different attitude towards women than men in terms of the way the criminal system works. So for example, if you're a woman and you have children and you're arrested at a protest, you're less likely to be given a custodial sentence. So there's that kind of aspect of things. And I remember back in 2020 when Alexei Navalny was poisoned with Novichok and he was lying in a Russian hospital, and his family and his allies were desperately trying to get him out of the country and get him to Germany for emergency treatment because they didn't trust the doctors, of course, in Russia. Who appealed to Vladimir Putin, she wrote a public request for him to be released, for them to be able to take him abroad, and it was because of her very emotional, direct appeal as a wife that eventually his body was, well, his body, he was alive of course, but his unconscious body was transported to Germany. So I think, women are very, very powerful in Russia in a way that perhaps Vladimir Putin doesn't quite realise.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Banished from Russia. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who we've just heard Sarah mention, is the politician who ran against the key Putin ally next door. She got into politics after her husband was put in prison in 2020 and was the main opposition candidate in Belarus against Alexander Lukashenko in the country's election that year. She now runs a government in exile from Lithuania and Poland and met with Yulia Navalny shortly after the news of Alexei Navalny's death.
Yesterday when I met Yulia, we just understood each other without even any words, because we understand what it means for both of us. And of course, Putin and Lukashenko, they are good dictators and they are learning from each other. This murder of Navalny, is a very clear message that dictators can kill people, can kill their opponents, and the response of democratic society should show that such murders will have consequences.
I wonder about your life day to day. In this way I can understand Yulia and her family as well. They've had the news they fear. Bluntly, can I ask you, do you fear that Sergei is dead?
Yesterday when I talked to Yulia, she still hoped that this news about her husband was gossip, because we all want to believe that our beloved are alive. I want to believe that my husband is alive, because he's a strong person, his morality is high, but these gulags, these prisons are killing people. The last year he's kept incommunicado. It means that lawyer is not allowed to visit him, letters are not delivered, so actually I don't know if he's alive, if he's in punishment cell or how he is treated, so actually fully no information. It's one more way of torturing people, to break them, to show them that look, the world has forgotten about you, nobody takes care, because look, lawyer is not visiting, is not coming, you don't need anybody.
Let's say his name, Sergei Tikhanovsky. And what's the best thing about Sergei, your husband?
Sergei is an extremely brave person. You know, back in 2019, 2020, he was a person who challenged the dictatorship in Belarus. He was a person who went from city to city, talking to ordinary people, asking them about their lives. Maybe it was the first time in the history of our country when somebody was interested in lives of ordinary Belarusians. People have been killed, people disappeared, but Sergei became so important, and he showed to other Belarusians, it's you, it's your responsibility, it's you who have to change our country. You shouldn't wait for miracle. You have to do this with your hands.
Do you wish that you had a husband who had not spoken up and had kept him? You had a husband who's spoken up and you have lost him?
You know, it's a difficult question. On the one hand, we all lived for all these years not wanting to be involved in politics. It's not my duty, you know, let them, dictators, decide the future of our country, the destiny of our country. And this silence brought us to the situation when our country was seized by dictator. And 2020 woke Belarusians. I think that Sergei and other leaders who are also in prison now, they showed to Belarusians that it's important to be brave now, because you are writing history of your country.
In my country, we have people regularly on the radio complaining about our politicians and our political system. Because you have yourself been sentenced to jail in Belarus, you're speaking to me from another country, because your husband has been jailed for criticising the regime, do people of Britain need to educate themselves about what democracy is like, not to take it for granted?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when I started to see more nations and see how people don't cherish democracy they have, it's so wonderful that you can criticize your government and you will not be sent to prison. But also it's your obligation to understand what's going on in the world, in other countries, not to be concentrated only on yourself, on your families, on your, I don't know, cozy lives, but to think broader.
If Sergei could hear a message, probably can't, but if, what would you say?
I would say how much I love him and proud of him. Because actually he also was one of the first people who explained to Belarusians, first of all, that the destiny of every nation, of our nation, is in our hand. And I wanted to say to him that we are keeping fighting, that we are doing all possible. The democratic world is so powerful, but sometimes this world is reluctant to use the instruments and tools you have. It's about a fight between democracy and tyranny.
Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, president of the Coordination Council of Belarus, reflecting on Alexei Navalny, who deliberately chose to go back to Russia and is now dead. It's 17 minutes past 9. Next, we've Jules Holland on Love Songs, in tribute to Steve Wright, the legendary DJ who championed them. Wright died last week, aged 69, triggering messages from thousands of radio fans, many of whom recalled perhaps a dedication in Steve Wright's Sunday love songs. Jules was a listener and frequent guest in Steve's shows, so we asked him to go in praise of the love song, as a love song to his radio hero.
I love Steve Wright, and I think he was one of the greatest disc jockeys, because he would be able to play things and put it into a context which would make you feel something romantic, even if you hadn't got up, even if you were actually in the middle of a road rage incident, he would soften it with his lovely love song.
BBC. Good morning, this is Steve with the team, and welcome to Love Songs.
So chores never end, even for me, Albert Einstein. But you know what? I'll leave it all till later, because I've got a smart meter. And right now I'm part of a scheme where I get rewarded for changing when I use my energy. More than 1 million others took part last winter using less energy at peak times. Good, eh?
Get ready to start earning rewards. Search Get a Smart Meter today. Eligibility and availability vary. Consumer action required. Reward schemes available to selected customers.
How likely is she to, have another heart attack?
Can I still go to the gym after heart surgery?
Is my mum still my mum if she has a new heart?
When it
comes to heart health, no question is too big or small. That's why British Heart Foundation have dedicated cardiac nurses you can speak to by phone, email or online chat.
Hi, this is Chloe from British Heart Foundation. How can I help?
Search BHF Cardiac Nurses.
F1 is back and it's lights out and away we go around the world. Wahanda Norris, Jedekante Mala Hamilton. Norris hat and the leiding. Bergs in hand van de eerste bocht. Zo steamer. Hamilton waar Norris zo corso to steal. Hamilton takes him and the race is wide open.
Around the world in 24 races. See it all live on Sky Sports F1 plus £15 extra a month. Season starts in Bahrain from the 29th of February. Offer ends 21st March. Sky TV required. See sky.com for details. Further terms apply.
TfL fares are frozen until March 2025. TfL pay-as-you-go single fares on bus, tube, DLR, tram and most of the Elizabeth line and London Overground are frozen. That is how we're supporting Londoners by making travel more affordable. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters. Excludes Elizabeth line fares beyond Zone 6 and some fares on London Overground.
If you were missold a timeshare, mytimeshareclaim.co.uk could help you win compensation. Text timeshare to 78900 to find out more. Right now, Tesco is giving you a double helping of Club Card points when you shop. That's double points on things like fish and chips and loo rolls and light bulbs. That should brighten up your day. To get double points, shop online at Tesco or tap the app when you check out in store. Ends February the 25th. Club card required. Exclusions apply. See tesco.com/double club card points terms.
Matthew Wright on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Nikki from Kent says, I'm a great advocate for free speech, but how would that grandmother from Just Stop Oil like it if a screaming horde turned upside her grandchildren's home and terrified them outside? Well, you obviously weren't listening, Nikki, because she said she'd invite them in for a cup of tea. Kim from Wimbledon says, morning Matthew, great show. Are these MPs' houses we the taxpayer have paid for? Oh, I see what you're saying. I understand your point, demonstration has limits, however, we live in interesting times. Well, we'll leave that thought hanging in the air. We'll come to your calls on whether or not demonstrators should be allowed to turn up at MPs' homes in just a moment. But first, I'm joined by Michael Tomlinson, Minister of State for Countering Illegal Migration. Good morning to you, Michael.
Matthew, good morning.
Good morning. I'll kick off, if I may, with the events in Newhaven on Friday, because having seen, your party has reduced the number of boat crossings, and that should be acknowledged, but obviously there's no concerns that in clamping down on small boats coming over from the continent, we're seeing perhaps a return to lorries and rail. Is that what you fear?
This is a hugely important issue, Matthew. Thank you for raising it. And whether it's small boats, whether it's getting in the back of lorries, it's very clear that the people smugglers don't care whether you live or whether you die. All they're concerned about is the bottom line. They want to maximise their profit. And what we're doing is, as you acknowledged, we're clamping down on the small boats. Last year, small boat crossings were down by 36%, and 16,000 fewer people crossing. But you're absolutely right. We do need to be vigilant about displacement. I was in France 48 hours ago, and already you can see how the MO, how the modus operandi, the method of operating, if you like, is changing. The criminal smugglers are moving further west. They're trying to launch more people in each boat, and sadly we're seeing violence on the beaches in France as well. So we need to be absolutely vigilant to make sure that we clamp down on all routes, all illegal routes across.
Is this fixable? Because it just seems that you put your finger in one hole in the dam and then another hole bursts out and we put a finger in that. And as you said, the smugglers, you make life more difficult for the smugglers, but they keep coming back at us.
Well, this is crucially important, and that's why, for example, tomorrow we've got the Rwanda bill that's back in Parliament. The House of Lords are going to be debating that on the floor in committee stage. It will then come back to the House of Commons in due course, I'm sure, for some parliamentary ping-pong between the House of Commons and the House of Lords. But once that bill's up and running, once the treaty has been properly ratified and the bill is in place, then we'll see planes taking off the ground, and that's one part of our strategy, making sure that the deterrent effect is in place, because people will know it doesn't matter how they get here, crossing on a small boat, it is not worth your while. And people are being sold alive, frankly. They're being told that there are jobs here, they're being told all sorts of things, giving money to the criminal gangs, and we're saying no.
Now, there's a survey in, I think it's the Mail today, that suggests that 9 out of 10 old Conservative voters would come back to the party if it returned to a sort of more one-nation base, stopped talking about immigration, started fixing public services and such like. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that. When you mentioned Rwanda, £500 million of money, no one yet sent there.
Well, in terms of the cost, you're right to mention that. There is cost, but there's also cost in terms of the hotel use that we've seen, and then there's the human costs that we mentioned. In the last 3 months, in every single month, there have been fatalities in the channel. So it is, yes, it is the financial cost, but it is also the personal cost in terms of lives lost as well. This is a crucially important issue, and I don't think it's a one-nation issue versus an ERG issue. It's a whole Conservative Party united in wanting to ensure that we get this plan off the ground, that we get the deterrent effect. Can I just say this? The deterrent effect does work. We've seen that with Albania. The Prime Minister secured the deal with Albania back in December 2022. And last year we saw a 90% reduction. People from Albania know that it is not worth their while getting into those boats because they'll be sent straight back home. It's exactly the same principle, the same deterrent effect that we need to get up and running in relation to Rwanda.
OK, let's talk briefly about British gas profits, if we can, because when we discussed the fact that British Gas has seen their profits increase by more than tenfold, more than 1,000% in a year, with £500 million of public money partially responsible for these profits, a lot of people, myself included, were outraged. It seems like certain utilities are profiteering and with taxpayer assistance, which seems insane.
Matthew, I haven't seen those latest numbers or the latest figures, but I don't think we can apologise for supporting households and homeowners and households who needed support in terms of their energy bills. That was the right thing to do then, and that